So celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder where when someone eats something with gluten, what usually happens is, the nutrients goes into your stomach, gets digested a little bit, then goes to your intestines. And what happens is your intestines have small villi that kind of grab onto the nutrients and pull them in so it can be absorbed. But what happens with celiac disease is those villi, they get shortened, so it becomes almost smooth, and then your body doesn't absorb nutrients there. And so lots of things can happen because of that. Lots of malnutrition, because you think you're eating really healthy or you think you're eating good for your body, but your body is not absorbing any of the nutrients. And a lot of scarring can actually occur in your intestines. And when that happens, they do end up healing over time, but that area of your intestine doesn't really absorb nutrients ever again. To the extent that it would if it was healthy and you didn't have celiac disease. So a lot of people get a lot of digestive issues with it, mainly because it is kind of a gut disease. But it's not really limited to that. You can have, some people get like big headaches. Some people kind of break out into a rash. Some people get really tired really easily because you're not getting the nutrients that you need. And it's something that you really do have to be kind of constantly vigilant about. Because the severity depends on people. Some people, if you have celiac disease, then eating any gluten is bad. But some people, cross-contamination isn't as big of a deal as it is for others. And so there is kind of this scale or spectrum, if you will, based off of how severely your body reacts to gluten. So how to figure out you have celiac disease? Well, I guess the first part is your gut kind of tells you. It is kind of you notice that whenever you eat gluten or something that you get really sick. And then you typically start what I like to call the doctor shuffle, where you go to a doctor and you talk about them. And initially, celiac disease is often misdiagnosed as IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Because you go to the doctor and you say, oh my goodness, my stomach always hurts whenever I eat rice, not rice, but bread and pasta and all these other things. And so doctor typically says, okay, well, you potentially have IBS, so here's some foods to avoid. And but things to look for specifically if you're thinking, maybe let's talk about maybe if your kid has celiac disease. Because celiac disease affects the way that your body absorbs nutrients, it's really hard to gain weight. And typically, like some of the kids that I've seen who were celiac and knew they were celiac growing up, they're super skinny. I'm like talking super skinny. Like this one guy I know, this kid, he is super awesome. He is super tall, but he is a stick. Another thing that I heard is a symptom of being celiac is that you can break bones easily. Once again, we're going back to your body doesn't absorb nutrients like it should, and so you don't get the vitamin D or to the bones that you need, and so you break bones easily. Did I break a lot of bones while I was growing up? Yes. I don't know if it's because I was celiac or because I am celiac, or if it's because I was a very active young little man and wanted to do everything my older siblings did, and in the course of events would fall and didn't know how to fall properly. So those are kind of some of the major ones. You're tired sometimes people are tired all the time because you don't get the nutrients. When I have a celiac attack, what I call it, when I get cross-contaminated or eat gluten unknowingly, I just sleep for long periods of time. And it's not because I'm like trying to be lazy or trying to, like catch up on my Z's. It's because, it's kind of like not eating and then trying to survive. Your body needs to gain energy somehow, and sleep often is a way that it can try to compensate for that. And so those are some of the symptoms and try to figure it out. Really, the for sure way to figure out if you have celiac disease is to go to a doctor and to get some blood work done. Here's the tricky part about the blood work, however. If you're already living a gluten-free diet, then the blood work doesn't really work because it doesn't detect the antibodies that your body would be producing if you were on a gluten diet, and it's trying to compensate for that. One of the for sure ways to figure it out is to have a GI done, and they go and they look at your intestines, and they look to see if there's scarring, or they look to see if the villi are shorter, or if there's other signs and stuff that they can see. Obviously not preferable because those are A, awkward, and B, painful, and C, you don't like to drink whatever juice they give you beforehand. Lots of times celiac disease will run in the family. I've got an uncle who's celiac, I've got a grandma who's celiac, I've got a sister who's celiac, and so, but that's not always the case because my best friend is celiac and no one in his family has celiac disease. So he's just special in more than one way, but one way being celiac. And so that's kind of, it's really hard because you go through the doctor shuffle and they kind of put you through everything. As far as treatments go, once you find out you're celiac and you've accepted the fact that donuts are no longer a part of your life, which sometimes takes a while, then really the only treatment they have for celiac disease right now is to abstain from eating any gluten. Now, there's always, some scientific articles or stuff coming around saying that they're getting closer to a cure for celiac, and which would be awesome, and many blessings upon the scientists who figure it out. But the for sure way is just to abstain from anything gluten and to live a gluten-free diet, which is very intimidating at first. I can remember when I was first diagnosed and you walk into a grocery store and it's just like, what can I eat? There's nothing here. It's kind of depressing. You see like happy people walking along with like all the bread and the donuts and all the good stuff in their cart, and you're over there like, well, here are some carrots and like maybe some beets, and like I'll go way out there and get some peanut butter. But it's really not that bad once you get used to the diet. You do have to get used to cooking gluten-free is a whole nother beast because the flours act differently than wheat flour. The way to not go about it, I heard of someone once who, this is comical to me, but they ate, Little Debbie snacks? They ate tons of Little Debbie snacks one night, like many packages of different Little Debbies, and woke up the next day and were like, oh my goodness, my stomach doesn't feel good. I think I'm gluten intolerant. I think I'm celiac. And it's like, no, that's stupid act. Like, if you eat that much junk food, of course your body's going to be like, I'm celiac. And so when you're, I'm jumping back and forth, but when you're trying to figure out if you're celiac or not, a good way to go about it is kind of also an elimination diet. And, where 1 week you eat gluten and you're very happy because you're eating gluten, but you're very sad because you're very sick all the time. The next week, you don't eat gluten, and you're very happy because you're never sick. And maybe you're sad because carrots are not that appealing. But after you keep a food journal, and after you keep the journal for a while, you start to see patterns and trends. And then that's a lot more useful information you can take to your doctor besides, when I eat food, I feel sick. So that's something that you can do, especially if you have a little kid and you're a parent. You really can control their diet to a large extent. Unless, they go to some nursery or daycare and they're holding the kid down and forcing like a muffin in his mouth. Which if that is, like, go to a different daycare. But track down everything that your kid's eating and see when they come talk to you about when they feel bad. You can also notice some physical symptoms. Obviously, like, you're going to spend a lot of time on the toilet if you've been cross-contaminated. Another thing is you often get bloated. a lot. And so if you notice that your kid's stomach is like abnormally large and they look bloated all the time, that's not a for sure sign, but that's just kind of something you could be like, oh, Johnny, you look bloated. I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to notice that. Write that down in the food journal after you've eaten. Say, okay, what did Johnny eat before this? Oh, it looks like Johnny had some graham crackers, which, have gluten in them. And then you can say, okay, well, let's see if when Johnny is all the way off of gluten, if he still has this problem, if he still has all the diarrhea, if he still has some of the other symptoms that we've talked about. So in the end, though, maybe this sounds kind of weird, but the individual who has celiac or gluten intolerance has to listen to their body. And you have to listen to things like when your stomach hurts, or when you get diarrhea, or when you get massive headaches sometimes, or when you just want to sleep everything away. Not like you're in finals week and sleep your life and cares away, but you get contaminated and sleep. You have to listen to your body and be aware, because your body is trying to tell you what's going on. And so as you listen to your body, then next time you can say, oh, okay, I am not going to eat that bagel. I'm not going to eat that donut. I'm not going to eat that slice of bread or the homemade cake or whatever it is. And this is also where you start to get to learn random foods that have gluten in them. And so, yeah, those are, and treatments for gluten intolerance, sometimes at like a Walgreens or a CVS pharmacy, they've got like pills that you can eat, and apparently it's supposed to help you to be able to digest gluten. They don't work for anyone who has celiac disease because it's a whole nother beast. I have some friends who are gluten intolerant, and they say that sometimes it works for them. I can't vouch for them 100% because I'm not gluten intolerant, and so I don't know if they work for someone who is or not, but you could try them out. If you're feeling very adventurous, end up to being sick for a week. If you're not, then, just continue living the gluten-free diet. A large portion of people find out they're celiac probably during their childhood. And once again, celiac tends to run in families. And so if you've got a relative or a grandparent or a parent or a sibling who's celiac, then, take a good close look at your kids. But for me, I ate, growing up in my house, my parents' house, since my sister was celiac, I ate a pretty good gluten-free diet most of the time. And so we didn't notice the symptoms in me till I went on my mission, a 2-year mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where members of the church would feed us food, and all of a sudden I was having gluten pretty much every day. And kind of from the get-go, from the start of my mission, I was having all these problems, and we didn't figure it out until after my mission. Also, disclaimer, because I was super stubborn, and I thought it was celiac disease, and I didn't want it to be, because I knew I'd have to change a lot of my life. But it's not really that bad. So I would have to say most people probably as kids, maybe teenagers. But it kind of also depends. If you grow up eating only Thai food, then you might not even know. And just because you don't have the symptoms, like the diarrhea and the headaches and the sleeping and the malnutrition, that doesn't mean that you're not celiac. You could still be celiac, just have different symptoms. So the best way is just go get that blood work done and then the GI. So what I know, and I am not a doctor or a medical professional by any means, but let's say Jefferson eats, goes rogue and eats some bread. The bread goes through the stomach, gets into the small intestine where it starts to should absorb the nutrients. From what I understand, my body attacks it as if the gluten is something that should not be there. And so what happens is in that attacking, it attacks the villi, which that makes the villi get shorter. And that's where the bleeding and the scars and stuff occur. And so that's where often if people find blood in their stool, if they're celiac, that's one of the reasons why, is because your intestines are bleeding internally. As far as more like the molecular biology behind it, I don't know, I don't understand it to that level, but I do understand that your body treats it as something that is, shouldn't be there, something that's dangerous to the body, and so it tries to attack it, and in the process, kind of attacks itself. So, but that's all I know about that. I was reading online, and it seems like the number I got was about 200,000 cases per year of celiac disease specifically. Gluten intolerance, I don't really know per se how many individuals a year experience that. The difference is that with celiac disease, you have to go and there's some blood work that has to be done, as well as sometimes they go into a GI and take a look at you just to see if you have celiac disease. Whereas gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity, sometimes people just kind of, they eat food and then they notice, oh, every time that I eat bread, or every time I go and have pasta or lasagna or something, I just don't feel that good. So I feel like I'm gluten intolerant. So there's kind of a differentiating line where if you're celiac, it's more of you have to go to a doctor to get it tested, and if you're gluten intolerant, then you don't. But a lot of the symptoms for some people are the same between both of them. So the scarring of the intestines and stuff is pretty limited to celiac disease, from what I've learned and what I've gathered. Gluten intolerance is more just kind of, I don't feel good or I get sick when I eat gluten, and doesn't really, to my knowledge, doesn't affect some of the more severe symptoms of celiac disease. And so, and sometimes people with gluten intolerance, it's really hard because there are a lot of people who just want to go on the gluten-free diet, and so they say they're gluten intolerant, when in reality they can eat gluten probably all day and be fine. And so, once again, it goes back to the spectrum idea, and on level of severity and seriousness, celiac disease is probably at the higher end of the spectrum, going down to people who just want to join the gluten-free fad diet and are gluten intolerant, and they're probably on the lower severity. But there are people that go everywhere in the spectrum. So you just really have to listen to your body, figure out what it needs, and then be cautious and careful with what you eat from there. And sometimes I feel like that's what happens with gluten intolerance, is someone just eats gluten all the time. And it doesn't have to be they are always eating, like French bread or something. Maybe they have toast for breakfast, big sandwich for lunch, and then like chicken pot pie or something for dinner. And they have just gluten all the time, and their system kind of is like, whoa, I'm overloaded on gluten. Like, I'm going to tell you and let you know by being angry at you. And so it does, and then you're like, oh my goodness, I'm gluten intolerant, I have this horrible disease, like my life has changed. It's like, no, just switch it up, Eat some rice noodles, they're very good. Eat some meat, very good for you as well. Learn something from the rabbits, eat the leafy vegetables. Have a well-balanced diet, and you'll be okay. The great thing about being celiac today is that because a lot of people have kind of jumped on the gluten-free diet bandwagon, whether they have to or not for health reasons, a lot more food producers are creating quality gluten-free food. With that being said, I visit the gluten-free aisle very seldomly, because honestly, a lot of the food there, while well-intended, tastes horrible. And you just don't like eating bad food. And it's super expensive anyways. And so I'm a poor, struggling college student. But some of my go-tos are, some of the gluten-free pasta now is super good. And so gluten-free pasta, other things is Red Barn. The brand Red Barn has some really good gluten-free oatmeal. And you can just put that, in the pot. Takes 5 minutes. Pamela's If you don't know about Pamela's flour, then you're missing out. There are hundreds of types of flours out there. But Pamela's all-purpose gluten-free flour, it's expensive. It's like $14 or $15 for 4 pounds. But you want it because it's the best substitute flour. I don't want to be that gluten-free person and say it tastes just like the normal thing, but it's the closest thing that tastes like normal gluten-free food. And like I talked about earlier, Cheerios is now gluten-free. It's like a blessing from heaven because I eat Cheerios probably like every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Kind of bad, but sometimes you're really looking for good, easy fixes. Quinoa also, I don't know if you know what quinoa is. It's another type of grain. Kind of like rice, a little bit smaller, interesting taste and texture. Depending on how it's flavored, can taste super good. Quinoa, rice, rice is super easy, super quick, but you typically have to make the rice yourself, not one of those instant packets. And then a lot of meats that aren't seasoned. Tuna fish is great. Like, we're all grateful that bacon is usually gluten-free. Like, that's a blessing. The really hard one is trying to find gluten-free bread. There's not really like a go-to, this tastes just like Sara Lee's or Walmart's gluten bread. You're not going to find it. Typically gluten-free bread, you have to find one that you can grow to appreciate, we'll say. And then once you find one, you just kind of stick to it. And the thing about gluten-free bread too is typically it's either like drier than the Sahara Desert or more moist than New York is with its humidity. And so you have to figure out how to keep it. So typically I have to keep a lot of gluten-free food in the fridge so it doesn't go moldy in like 2 or 3 days. Because nothing is worse than thinking about making French toast for breakfast and then you go and your gluten-free bread is all moldy. And so you go to the Cheerios. Oh, Chex as well. Theirs is just naturally gluten-free because they've got, Chex rice. Well, don't eat their Chex wheat because that's obviously not gluten-free. But Chex cereal is also a good place to go. When people ask me, like, what do you eat? What do you normally do? I usually give the response that, well, I eat anything a rabbit eats. Because typically, fruits and vegetables are pretty safe. But really and honestly, I eat anything that you guys eat. I just have to prepare it differently. When going out to eat is a whole nother ballpark. Typically, when a group of friends wants to go out to eat, or you're going on a date, or whatever, there are some places that are good gluten-free, and typically cross-contamination is not that bad. I'm a big proponent for Chick-fil-A. They are awesome to work with. They're gluten-free. Chicken nuggets are really good. Their sauces, you have to ask them which ones don't have gluten in them, but the Chick-fil-A sauce and the Polynesian sauce don't. And the other really good food that if you're celiac or gluten intolerant, you need to get to love is Thai food. It's super good, typically rice-based. Pad Thai noodles are a blessing. Curry is great. Once again, with curry, you have to make sure that the seasonings and sauces and stuff don't contain gluten. But other restaurants are really gluten-free friendly as well, even if they do serve gluten. They can't say that they are 100% gluten-free because there is always the cross-contamination can occur. But Costa Vida is really good at being gluten-free. If you go through their line and you say something like, can I have the corn tortillas? They're going to ask, oh, are you gluten-free? And you say yes. And everyone in the line changes out their gloves so that the cross-contamination isn't as likely. Now, is it still possible? Yes. Is it like playing Russian roulette? Yes. But is the benefit worth it? Sometimes, because it's good food. Other times you get super sick and then it's not worth it. But you kind of have to pick and choose. Sometimes going to a buffet place like Cracker Barrel, that's really taking your life into your own hands. because sure, you can stick to the salad bar. Salad bar is great. Probably tastes very good. Once again, we're akin to rabbits. But like when you see someone over there having like a steak, you're just kind of like, this salad is really tasty and really nutritious. And so you go and try the steak, and next thing you know, you're sick. So you have to be careful. Sometimes it's awkward when you're going to like dinner at someone else's house and they know that you're celiac and they say, don't worry, I cooked completely gluten-free. But then you want to trust people, and you sincerely appreciate the efforts that they go to. But you always kind of have to be a little skeptical when they say this is completely gluten-free, because they just don't think about things that might contain gluten, and they just don't know. And it's not like, they're trying to be like, oh, Jefferson, I'm going to pour some flour into your drink and like see if you're really gluten intolerant or celiac. So typically when people invite me over to their house for food or stuff, I do stick with the rabbit food because it's safe. So, and then when people, this might be horrible of me and I will repent later, but when people bring me treats or stuff and they're like, hey, we made this for you, it's gluten-free, you say, oh, thank you so much. And if I really trust the person, I will eat it. But if not, I thank them for it and either tell my roommates or my family, like, go for it, it's all for you. And then if they don't want to eat it, find someone else to give it to, or just throw it in the trash. Because, and it's not like I'm not appreciative of what they've done, but you just get burned too many times. And it's not fun, and you're sick for like a week, and it's challenging. And so that's another thing with food that you kind of have to, look out for. Oh man, I wish I knew all the different types of food that had gluten in it, because I would definitely avoid them. But some of the kind of culprits that you don't think about are when you're cooking and maybe you use like spice mixes instead of just pepper or just plain salt. A lot of the times they put gluten into those mixes just to hold things together or for whatever purpose. But then you use it and you get super sick, so you have to look at the back and see that there's gluten in it. Another one is oatmeal. Oatmeal in and of itself doesn't contain gluten, but typically what happens is farmers, they grow the grains and stuff and they mix their crops. And so that's where cross-contamination occurs. Potato chips sometimes have gluten in them, which you're like, why would something like that ever have gluten? But I guess they want it. And so you kind of have to be, you just have to be very careful with everything that you eat and look at. So obvious foods, you've got bread, pasta. Some less obvious ones is you've got those rice packets, kind of instant rice that sometimes have flavoring and stuff in them. You look at them, they've got gluten. You take a look at canned beans sometimes, you have to look at the back, they've got gluten. You take a look at, I'm trying to think of some of the more, luckily fruit snacks don't have gluten. Like, that's a blessing from heaven. But a lot of times candy, some forms of candy, like some obvious ones, like Snickers, you're probably going to have some gluten in there. But some not obvious ones, I can't think of any of those off the top of my head. But as you walk through the grocery store, I'm just trying to take a mental trip. Oh, meat. Lots of the times, like when Macy's or a store has processed the meat themselves, and they put, the culprit there is seasonings again. They put their own seasoning or own rub on it, and lots of the time they don't come out and say this product contains gluten, but you have to be careful because of the seasoning as well. Unfortunately, pizza has gluten. It's a really sad day for all of us because gluten-free pizza is not the same as normal pizza, whatever they tell you. Sometimes it's nasty. Other foods that contain gluten that you wouldn't think about. It's tricky because I try to avoid all of them now. Cereal, you have to be careful with cereal, just in general. Luckily, the Cheerios cereal brand is now gluten-free. And they're all oat-based, but they were able to go through and sift out all of the wheat, the barley, and the rye, which are the three main culprits for when you have gluten contamination. So I don't know, really, when you're trying to see if it has gluten or not in it or not, you have to check everything at the store. And so I'm constantly, shopping takes way longer than it should because you're looking at the label, trying to see if it has gluten in it or not. And then sometimes a lot of the factories will say, be careful because this food was processed on equipment that also processes fish or nuts or wheat or dairy or soy or something else that the other people are allergic to. So as much as I want to say, everything contains gluten, it kind of feels that way. Maybe it's because I can't eat anything else, but you do have to check almost every label. So I feel like you should watch your diet no matter what, especially if you're celiac or you have a digestive issue. I haven't noticed any adverse effects because sugar typically doesn't have gluten in it, especially if it's just pure sugar. And admittedly, when I have a celiac attack and I need lots of energy, obviously I'm eating the apples. Apples are something really good that I eat because they're a natural body cleanser. But if I need a lot of energy real quick, I will go grab some sugary candy and eat it. And you can slay me on social media because it's not healthy or whatever, you just get a spike or something. But it's a quick, convenient food to help you get back on your feet. Now, does that mean that I like to go and eat candy all the time? I try not to. I mean, I'm just like the average, young adult. But I don't know of any really adverse effects besides the fact that if you overload on anything, you're going to regret it later. Most difficult aspects are finding safe foods. So when I have a celiac attack or I eat gluten, I go back to 3 or 4 foods that I know I can eat and my body is not going to reject me. And so I feel like if you're celiac or gluten intolerant, you need to find out what those foods are. And that's really where your family or loved ones can help you. They can look up, they can research, Jefferson, have you tried rice cakes? Jefferson, maybe have you tried rice pudding, since I'm on the rice, I don't know. Or Jell-O, or other things that are gluten-free. The other thing that is really helpful for friends and loved ones that I have is they understand that sometimes I just have to be like, hey, I'm sorry, I gotta go. Because my body is currently going through the gluten symptoms, and I just need to be by myself and take care of this. And so I've been mid-conversation with a bunch of friends and been like, sorry, gotta go. And they understand it's not because I hate them or because the conversation was boring, but because Jefferson has something he needs to take care of. Other things are never, ever. Sometimes people think it's okay to when they're cooking Chinese food, soy sauce has gluten in it, to maybe slip some of the gluten soy sauce into the Chinese food just to see if you are really gluten intolerant or celiac. If you are their loved one, don't ever do that. Because whoever is celiac or gluten intolerant will not see you as a loved one anymore if they find out you did that on purpose to see if they had a reaction. So, the other thing that's been really nice is sometimes friends really do want to cook for you. And so instead of going on the internet and searching and being gluten-free, whatever, they'll come to me and they'll say, Jefferson, we want to have a dinner with you or something. Here's what's on the menu. Can you tell me anything that I should be wary of that might have gluten on it? And so, for example, I went to a barbecue a couple weeks ago with some families, and one of the moms texted me and said, Jefferson, we're going to have, I think it was pulled pork sandwiches. I know you obviously can't have the bread. Can you bring your own buns? So yes, it's so easy for, if you know you're going to have something like that, just let the gluten-free person bring their own buns because they already know where to buy it. They know the good ones. But then she said, I'm also using this barbecue sauce, which is something else that might have gluten in it. And will you let me know if this is okay or not? And so, I research the barbecue sauce. That particular brand is okay. And so I text her back and say, yep, that's fine. Thanks so much. Can't wait to see you guys. And then you go and you understand that, okay, there are gluten buns on the table. And so you just bring your own and you're fine. You're safe. It's a good, safe environment. But if you want to give your celiac friend or gluten intolerant friend a treat, go to the candy aisle. Because unfortunately, like 90% of the candy is gluten-free. Like anything gummy or Mike and Ike's or lots of other things, gluten-free. Give them to your celiac friend and they will love you. Because now they're just an unhealthy rabbit. But it's great. And so if you're wondering, because sometimes, you're dropping off a treat for everyone, but you made like these really awesome homemade cinnamon rolls and you want to give your celiac friend a treat as well, just go get some Mike and Ike's. Go get some Laffy Taffy. Go get some peach rings. Oh man, those are great. Get some peach rings, give them to them. And that's one way you can take care of your celiac friend. It can be really difficult at first when you find out that you're celiac, especially if you've been eating a gluten diet your whole life. Because you do go into the store, you look around, and you kind of say, wow, I really can't eat anything. And all my favorite foods had gluten in them. It can be very difficult when friends are like, hey, come out to eat with us. We're going to go to Panera Bread. And you're like, that's a war zone for me. It can be really hard and really depressing maybe at first because you feel like your whole world options of good food are just kind of shrunk. But it's not that bad. Honestly, there is a big adjustment period where you go through and you have to relearn. Sometimes you have to relearn this is now what bread tastes like. And you have to decide whether, okay, am I going to eat the bread or just discard it and have my lovely dreams of what I used to eat. But there are other things like macaroni and cheese that taste exactly the same as the good mac and cheese that you used to make, especially when you start to make things on your own. Some things won't taste the same, like pancakes. Probably not going to taste the same. But once again, going back to Pamela's all-purpose flour, they have a pancake mix, and it tastes really good. And just because you now can't eat gluten doesn't mean that your social life, and all aspects of your life are now just coming crashing down. Obviously, if you're someone who likes to drink protein shakes, I drink protein shakes, and I had to find a new protein shake to drink because the ones that I had and the ones that I found had gluten in them. There is a ton of hope and a ton of help out there. And some of the best, resources out there are mom blogs, where they go and they talk about this is what I do for gluten-free options. This is how I handle it. This is how I take care of it. Other things are if you know that you're going to go out to eat with a group of friends or they're going to go get a treat, pack yourself a treat, something that you know you're going to enjoy so that when they're all having their cinnamon rolls or their bagels or their donuts or their whatever people who eat gluten eat nowadays for treats, then you can have your own treat. And you're still there, you're still part of the group, you're still having food, you're still having fun. You will try some gluten-free food that is not meant to be eaten. And it's nasty. And some people really like it. Some people, for instance, really like mashed up cauliflower to be their crust for pizza as a gluten-free option. I personally do not. It's good for some people. I don't really like it. But if you eat that and you find out you like it, like, good for you. Once again, it's easier than you think. Do you have to be constantly vigilant? Yes. Do you have to like check the labels and everything? Yes. Do you have to be like new trust issues with friends who bring over food? Unfortunately, yes. But jokingly, I do tell people I eat anything that a rabbit can eat. But ideally, I eat anything that really you guys eat. I just have to prepare and cook it differently. And one of the cool things that you can do after you've gotten used to cooking gluten-free for a while is you invite people over to your house who don't know that you're celiac. And you have them eat the food. And they eat it and they go, "Oh my goodness, this is so good." And you're like, "Oh yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Just took like 6 years for me to learn how to cook like this." And you don't say that, obviously, it's just in your mind. But then they leave, and it's always a score if they don't know it's gluten-free. Because then they ask you, "What's the recipe for that?" And you're like, "Oh, well, you use this gluten-free flour." And they're like, "Oh my goodness, that was gluten-free?" And you're like, "Yes. My life is not sad, not pitiful. I enjoy bounteous blessings of food, and it's good." So when you're first diagnosed, hang in there. It is really rough. You do feel like a lot of things have been cut out. But you can find a replacement that is just as good for your gluten-free cookies. Or you can find a replacement just as good for your German pancakes. Really, the only thing that unfortunately you can't find as good replacement for is purebred. But it's okay. There's lots of other options.